if I gave you $20,000, where would you invest that in either your personal or professional development? You have to take a bet on what you think your future right to win in a marketplace is based on. I think it's really important in a fast-growing business to always be building for the future.
Hi, my name is Rohit Bassi, and welcome to the People Quotient podcast, where we focus on the most important asset in your organization, your people. In this podcast, I'll be speaking with CEOs, investors, and executives from around the world to learn how they build high-performing teams. But before we get going, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you like what you hear, give us a thumbs up and invite your friends and colleagues to also join the community. Without further ado, let's listen in. Want to find out how to build and scale a safety company that uses technology to protect 1.5 million kids every day across 350 communities in America? My next guest, Karoon Monfared, CEO of Bus Patrol, shares with us how he has built a team that does just that. Let's listen in. Karoon, I can't believe we're having this conversation after all these years. I'm so excited. I really am, just to see you, even though virtually. But also, I've obviously been paying a lot of attention to your journey and, your progress over the years. And I'm at, 15 years ago, it feels like. Maybe it wasn't quite as much, but a while ago.
We're up there now, my friend.
Yeah.
It was 2006, it's been 17 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you always were better at math than I was, so that's good. That's good. Let's go to do the numbers
You're
right.
always better at making fun of me than I was at.
So good to see you, man. I can't wait to have you share your thoughts with our audience and listeners about people. You've been one of the people I've always noted for having a tremendous skill set when it came to interacting with people. I've seen you from a very early stages of your career to now. So tell us a little bit about your background. What have you been up to? And then we'll dig a bit deeper into how you've navigated the world of talent and people.
Yeah, sure. Well, listen, I appreciate being able to come on here and share some thoughts, whatever I've learned on your platform. And so thank you for having me and always great to catch up. So look, our journey really started together at the firm in 2006 through 2010. What I really appreciated, and it stayed with me since that time, was two things. One, on how to build teams that work well together and in using, I guess, what is somewhat dated now around Myers-Briggs and MBTI and whatnot. And that's evolved into, DISC assessments and whatnot. And the second part of it was really about thinking through fundamentally what it is that you're looking to hire for. What do you need the team to accomplish? And then connecting that back to, okay, well, how do I take an approach that de-risks that I'm actually getting what I think my organization needs, and then connecting that back to the right temperament. And I think that's one thing I really appreciated early on in my career, that there's sort of like the foundational skill sets, but so much of your success in hiring is making sure you find the right temperament, both for the job, but also people that you connect with. As you know, I left 2010 and I became an entrepreneur. And I left with a very close McKinsey friend. And he was from Paris and I was from LA. And so we met in the middle in New York City. And we started a tech company called Wisp. Probably not the best idea, two ex-McKinsey guys starting a business in e-commerce focused on the fashion vertical. As you can tell, I still haven't gotten any better at picking my own clothes, but it was sort of like having the right partner. And I think that's really important in your first team, your executive teams that you're building when you're in the C-suite, that personal rapport and trust, because there are going to be times that are, challenging and that you need to be resilient as an executive team. I think that was a really important sort of reason why we were able to navigate very challenging times in both that first startup that we did and the second one. And then I think the other part of it that was really important, a lesson from working with a very close friend, is how important it is to have empathy for your colleagues and understand the problems that they're solving for. So one of the things I say at Bus Patrol right now is we are a first team. And so what that means to us is that, my head of operations is a part of the first team, and he happens to be our liaison with operations. My CTO is part of the first team. It's our collective team and our collective problems. He just happens to be our liaison with the technology organization, because then it really becomes around collective ownership of our business objectives, of our goals, and it creates empathy, because typically, and this happens at every level of organization, in my experience, um, when someone comes to you with something that is their problem, or, they're trying to get done, it's usually because of a pressure point from a customer or something that they are responsible for delivering against. And so when you sort of take this first team ethos, I have found in the organizations I've built later in my career, it helps break down those silos and forces empathy, because then it becomes our collective problems. And I don't think I would have had that lesson if I hadn't worked with one of my best friends earlier in my career as a true business partner, because I found, and we went through a number of CTOs in that first organization. What I found is, when that personal connectivity and that shared empathy wasn't there, the relationships became transactional. And frankly, the organization became more fragile whenever you had some adversity. So anyway, I'm jumping around, but I went from McKinsey to startup number one, made a ton of mistakes in that first business, learned a lot about team building, organization building, especially in the context of scaling startups. Did a little better in the second one, with the same business partner, by the way, Monsef, and we ran it back at Moco, where we were building SaaS analytics for large CPG companies, industrial companies, manufacturing businesses. And then in the middle of COVID, while we were taking a siesta from our business, one of my former colleagues called from McKinsey and said, "Hey, we've got some tricky leaders that we've invested in, and they need help with operations and technology, but your EQ is also sort of appropriate for the situation." And so Bus Patrol was first a client from my second business, and then eventually ended up joining as COO about 3 years ago, became president a year ago, and now CEO about 2-3 months ago. So I'll pause there and see if there's any area that makes sense for me to sort of deep dive into.
Yeah. And first of all, congratulations. It's such a amazing journey. You obviously had lots of learning moments. And, I think so it makes me very proud to be part of, even from a distance, at some point in your career. And then, but also now as friends, I think it's really cool just listening to you. Yeah, the manifestation of the achievements are in the roles, but it's the person behind it is what I find really exciting to see and hear, because the words they use are not just, kind word, but also clearly they've grounded you in principles that have benefited you. And that the biggest one, while you didn't say it, is this, curiosity and desire to learn, and then learn from your own mistakes, learn from others, that is embedded in everything you just said. And I think that's tremendous, because obviously that's going to continue to serve you for as long as you do what you're doing. So awesome work, first of all. Second, I think the place that I find, you talk a lot about empathy, you talked about EQ, but really the beginning of the conversation, you talked about, the thing that we got drilled into us, which is asking the question, what are you solving for? And I love that question. I think unknowingly, I ask that question all the time, from the littlest of things that surround me to big macro topics. How do you, as you go into building teams, and in this specific case, you adopted a team first, and then now you're redesigning a little bit of it, a lot of it. Where do you start with that question as to what are you solving for? When it comes to building an organization, of course, you're like, well, I'm solving for, having people do the work. Is there anything deeper than that you go into saying, okay, that's a really important question, by far the most important question that many small, medium businesses don't ask. But then what happens next?
Well, look, I think one of the things, and you're right, we did get it drilled into us, what are you solving for? I think the first thing that I would sort of, and I say this to everyone that works for me or works with me, which is, we can't stop asking that question. because what we're solving for, like today, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, we have to keep asking that question to see if we're sort of satisfying it. And like the brutal truth is, 20 years of hiring now, almost 20 years of hiring now, you make a lot of mistakes around what you think you're solving for and what you actually really need to solve for. And I can give you an example from our early days at Bus Patrol, right? What we do is we put cloud connected cameras onto school buses to help municipalities enforce against violators of stop arm laws. A school bus stops, kids are getting on and off. A stop arm comes, the cars are supposed to stop. And so that process of actually getting the equipment onto buses is quite intense. And, our first version of the answer was what we need to do is we don't want to take on the permanent payroll of having technicians on our staff, because some months we need to deploy 1,000 and then there'll be a gap and then we need to deploy 500 and so on and so forth. So we don't want to have that, that managing that utilization problem. And so what we did is we went on hiring in a very different way. We screened like 16,000 technician companies in the country and said, okay, here's in the country. So here's the skill sets we need. Here's the types of folks, contracts that we need. Here's their capability set that we need. And very quickly, we realized that there's effectively two types of technicians out there, folks that are good with cameras, and then there are folks that are good with buses, and we needed to crossbreed them. And so we would not have gone through that journey until we had people who were good with cameras drill through hydraulic fluid lines and brake lines and things like that, and go through that. And so then we said, okay, well, we need to think about, success for our organization is we need the agility also to react quickly to new projects, especially when you're a small growing startup. But we need to make sure that we maintain the trust of our operating partners and really invest in cross-breeding that skill set. So we built a place called Bus Patrol Academy, where we went and bought 15 of the most prominent makes and models of buses, because they're each built slightly differently, put them into a warehouse in Chantilly, Virginia, started thinking about, what's the type of aptitude that we need our technicians to have to be able to do both of the type of work we were doing. And so we went through this like academic research process, Bassi, where we found that there's this test, a mechanical aptitude test called the Weizen test. It's been around since the 1970s that folks have digitized today. So it's really simple, like giving you pictures of different geometric shapes and saying, okay, if I turn this 90 degrees, what's the right answer? And so that makes people really comfortable on top of having sort of the general tooling skills and drilling or whatnot. It allows them to be effective in the constrained state of a bus. So we use that to filter out folks that would be otherwise qualified. And we built this training program. And I think that's a journey, right? That journey took a year for us thinking like, what do we need? How do we find the right partners? Then how do we try to incent them correctly? Okay, is that satisfying our customer need? And building it again. And then being very thoughtful around, once I believe I have an answer on what do I need, how do I test for those skills? I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen peers make or organizations that have more opportunity in team building is they're not intentional enough, even as a small business. When I joined, we were 60 people, and it was sort of crazy that we found this mechanical aptitude test to hire technicians when we were 60, 70 people. But the data proved out in the long run that by making that, and it really was like a couple extra days of work of just to find it, the benefits that we got from less retention, happier customers, because finding out after you've hired and someone's not successful in the role that you've hired is just, you've spent so much time building institutional knowledge and skills into a specific employee. The turnover cost of that was huge. And, we're very disciplined about that at Bus Patrol in terms of, okay, all right, we know what we want. What's the job description? What's the temperament? But how are we actually de-risking the skills? And we do that, by the way, for C-level executives too. It's, if you're a CEO and you're managing a board, you want to make sure that, every member of your first team can provide you really effective communication, that it's board ready, already to go. And I think it's easy as a small company to compromise on some of those things and not wait. But the deleveraging, in my experience, that costs versus waiting 1 month longer to find the right executives. Every time in the past where I've made that trade, I've regretted it. And so, we try not to do that too often.
Yeah, look, that there's a lot of wisdom in what you just talked about. Principally, I think, going back to the point around clarity, which is what are you solving for? It seems like, within that, you've also got the attributes, the job description. So you get very thorough so that there is more precision. Now, the idea is that, as you said in your own comments, is that you start by solving for something, you learn, and then you realize you need to solve for something else. It is an iterative process, but by asking that question constantly allows you to iterate more efficiently. And then separately, there's the how, right? That sort of covers the what, but then there's the how of it, which you obviously deployed tools that help you upfront in the process to identify candidates who would not work out, both on technical and other aptitude sets, but then also would work out. So you can spend more time with them and really invest in the back end, really thinking about it, whether it's through training or through further development. Question for you, as you think about bringing on these, individuals onto your teams, whether it's within your operating business or the technicians, as you call them, is there, as you think about certain specific skills, how much of those is designed by what you already have as a culture in the business versus the culture you want to build? So how do you balance between, I've got an existing culture, but you're also building new by the sounds of it, right? You're also adding new elements of the culture. Who are you hiring for? The present, the future? Just curious.
Yeah, I think that answer also changes over time. One thing that so our culture at Bus Patrol is principally around delivering safety. And that's safety to the communities and customers that we serve, but also you have to have safety internally. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult to be an entrepreneurial organization, innovate, take risks, try new things, and not feel safe if it doesn't work out. And so we mirror that very profoundly internally. I think the second thing is about connection. And I think that connects back to what I was talking about earlier about empathy. And so I don't care how amazing you are. If you are someone that's going to mess with our focus on safety or our people's ability to connect and work at risk, we just have a very sort of, low tolerance for that. And I'm actually proud because we have had certain instances where people have been high performers from an impact perspective, on a sales perspective, et cetera. And whatever we've tried to do in terms of development and coaching on those two core aspects of our culture, when they haven't gotten there, we've had the courage as a business to move on from that and really live our values on that aspect. The other part of that is sort of, and this is very true, especially when, we're an organization that's scaled, 12x in terms of our installed base and 9x in terms of our people growth. And the types of leaders and folks that you need at different parts of the organization change. I think it's really important when you have your own business or you're leading a small and fast growing business to always be building for the future. And in terms of what you functionally need, and it's very different when you're building a 10-story building versus a distributed organization that supports a skyscraper. And so the types of communication that you need to have as an executive team, the independence that you need to have, the reliance on your directors and VPs and managers and having the right management systems are just fundamentally different skill sets than the first team that proves out an idea and builds out sort of the raw form of the organization. And so the consistent theme about that is what do we expect in terms of how we want people to engage each other and create the right culture environment, but then a strong focus on performance and delivering results for what the business needs at that time. And that I think you always have to be current and future looking, but you want to be really respectful of the people that got you to the point that you're at here as well. Right. And so we invest a lot, as an example, in skill development. We have our own internal learning and development director, which I think is rare for an organization typically of our size. We actually have a learning manager who has an online portal where, like Bus Patrol Academy, we have a lot of skill development, over 2,000 skill development classes that folks can take in our e-learning modules and lunch and learns and things like that we do. And I think that's one, because it's just to retain great people, you have to continue to excite them about, this is the right pace for their professional development. But secondly, as some of those roles that are really relevant become less relevant, you want to make sure that for the people who have the hunger and want to invest in being developed into that new type of leader, you give them the opportunity to do it. I don't know if that answers your question, but it gives you a little bit of insight in terms of how we try to balance culture and performance and do right by the people that, sometimes for the good of the organization, you just have to make changes around.
Yeah, it is very helpful. I think the question that a lot of small, medium business owners and investors ask me, and I've faced them myself, is, I need, hiring. I agree with you that it's really important to honor what you've got and respect the people around you that have brought you thus far to this stage of the game. But the question becomes is, when you're trying to build for the future, there's only very limited capital available, right? And, do I go and find somebody to solve my business problems now, what's in front of me? Or do I find somebody, do I invest in the future needs, which may also evolve? And I think, how have you done it? Because you only got a small pot of cash. I mean, I'm sure you deal with this every time.
Yep.
And so the question is, there are three choices. You take the existing team members and actually give them more incentives so that they're happier and there's retention. Then you've got, a role that you want to fill up because it's either a pre-existing role or a slightly newly designed role that is solving the problems that, you've identified that you're solving for. And then there are stuff in the future that you as a leader know will come, right? You will know the company will outgrow itself and you'll reach that stage. And you also selfishly don't want to go back to the talent pool and hire again. Now, training and development can help upscale people. And so the question is that how have you taken your limited pot of cash and said, do I go hire somebody who can do the 10 other things that need to get done in the future now and hire? Or do I say, you know what, I'm going to wait for that and I'm just going to hire for who I need now because this problem is right in front of me today. And I can't really. So how have you made it? It's not an easy one. So there's no right or wrong. But what's your calculus been as you've thought about, I'm going to do this more than that because that's how I think my business will work better?
I think you have to take a bet on what you think your future right to win in a marketplace is based on. Okay. And, the places where I invest in the future, when I think about, how are we going to be as an organization that's going to 5X? If that, that calculus of, hey, we're going to be at Bus Patrol, we really believe we are a product-led organization, and that's going to be, and technology is going to be our key to success in the future. And, we have huge operational elements of our business in terms of how we serve the community, but we think that we're going to have to continue to develop there, but a lot of our efficiency and scale through what we're going to do through technology and AI investment is going to drive our ability to deliver operations more efficiently. And so the places that we take, bets on the skills that we need into the future are based on that sort of calculus. And so we brought in, an amazing, very experienced, has served, organizations 100 times bigger than us from a product perspective, technology team. And then there are other areas where, at the time, 2 years ago, when we were building out operations, we did a very similar approach and we invested less in technology. And so I think that's how we sort of balance into it. And you sort of think about, hey, where am I going to continue to be okay with what I have? On the third group of people that have brought you here that maybe aren't going to scale with you, the way that I've always thought about that is one, sort of that cohort of folks who are the continuous learners. And secondly, where is the institutional knowledge that the new folks who bring in skills but don't have the history of the business, that don't have the contextual understanding that you only get through years of being in a business with a customer set, with a set of partners, etc. Where are those critical channels that I need to preserve? Because the value of sort of some of those folks, they create amazing information networks in an organization. One of the things we really talk about at Bus Patrol is before we solution anything, we're always thinking, have we learned enough? What else do we need to know? And we really put a premium on being a learning organization, both internally and with our customers. And I don't care what people tell me in terms of certain foundational skills and, are they going to develop into being, that VP that can have 300 people? Maybe not, but the value they bring to the organization from that experience and knowledge is tremendous. Now, you can't do that everywhere and with everyone. And so you have to be selective and make those judgment calls where you're going to carry some of those folks forward. And, if I had to give sort of a rule, it's like the 20-60-20 rule, right? So the part of the organization that's going to lead your transformation, you can never, skimp on in terms of, your allocation of your future pot of gold. And then you got to think about the 60% that, is okay as it is today, where you really invest in L&D. And then there's sort of the additional folks that you're going to continue to carry on because they bring other aspects and preserve your history, your culture, and customer knowledge that you really can't afford to let go of.
Yeah, I think to summarize, basically what you're saying is that you, as a CEO, you've got an eye towards the future needs of the business because you've got to have that vision, but without trying to get too far ahead of yourself. It's almost like in waves or horizons, right? Whether it's a 18 to 24 month horizon or 24 to 36, nothing beyond that. And I'm quantifying it for those listening, saying, hey, look, how far ahead do I need to think about? Because the business evolves, because to your point, you're learning, because the industry becomes different, the world changes. And so have a look ahead as to what you think you will be needing and either hire somebody onto your team who already has that and is willing to take you there or has the intrinsic muscle that you can co-develop to get you there. And so you don't always have to go hire for somebody from 10 years out, but, just staying in the present while will be good. You need the person to develop with the growth of the company. And so looking for that skill set, there might be some trade-offs, but actually identifying them. And then I think the bigger thing that you talked about in terms of the what you're looking for is you go back to the primary, the safety aspect of it, as well as, making sure that there's empathy is the key to your, traits that you look for. I think that pairing that, so making sure that always what your primary attributes are, but then strategically balancing between an immediate versus the medium term. I think long term becomes a little hard for me to even digest sometimes because what is the definition of long? Has served you well, it sounds so far, in building the right team around you. Do you think about sort of getting a little more tactical in the last few minutes? When you think about your personal involvement in bringing people onto your team, right? So this is specifically people that either report to you or people that report to them. How much do you get involved in that process personally is part A of the question. And part B of the question is when you do get involved as you're testing out for safety and empathy beyond the, the aptitude tests and tools that you use, what are some of your questions that you ask that for those listening saying, I don't know how to test for empathy, or I do, but I'd love to hear some other ideas of questions. What types of things that you get into in a conversation, interview stage, where you're like really trying to find out if there is that? Because people, you really have to dig that out. It's not, people, if you can fill out a test, but I'm sure there are ways beyond the test that you've applied that have served you well.
Yeah. We certainly don't rely on just like assessments and
Yeah.
spreadsheets
Yeah.
in terms of what they approach. In terms of the first part of your question, I think it's very important for the first few hundred people that you hire, especially if you're intentional and building a culture with intention, to be pretty hands-on in hiring and the types of folks that you're hiring, or at least at a minimum that our first team is involved, our executive team is involved in those conversations. And the other thing that we do quite intentionally is we make sure that a wide group of people always interact with a potential candidate and beyond just the hiring manager. That's really critical for us. And by the way, sometimes there'll be something that we don't know about or a new area of the business that we'll build that we'll go and find other external people that we think know something about that and include them as part of our interview panels that we put together. So I think that's one, aspect in terms of the first bringers. In terms of how we think about, culture, connectivity, and how do we test for empathy and connection, one of the things we really screen for is like the mission. Like you have to personally care about wanting to make the journey to and from school for kids safer for you to really connect here, because that's just such a strong part of our culture. And so, by the way, Rohit, a lot of that is not actually about asking a specific question, but really listening carefully to the language a candidate uses. Right. And so a question that might prompt that, to be super tactical might be, hey, you have a really impressive background, and you can spend time anywhere. What drew you to, want to engage and lean into this conversation? And a lot of what they emphasize and also what they don't emphasize can be quite telling in terms of if they're connected to caring about what you as a business care about. And so that I think is really important. I think the other part of it, and this isn't going to shock you, but it's really fundamental and simple. But when you talk to them about, I ask a lot of the candidates I work with about, tell me about your team, right? And then also tell me who you work for and within your organization. And what do you like and dislike? And again, it's like language they use. Okay, what do you guys accomplish? Well, I accomplish versus we accomplish. Right. I also often ask them, tell me about your peers that aren't in their direct line, but what touch points do you have to the other parts of your organization? And how does your organization collaborate cross functionally? And just the examples that they give there, you'll develop a muscle over time around really how much connectivity do they care about? How much engagement do they have about other areas of their business? Because again, we really emphasize that mindset of, you happen to have a skill set that makes you a liaison to a part of our business, but you collectively own all of the parts of our business. And you just happen to be the person in that chair for that role. And so I think that's another part that we use very tactically. The other part, in terms of sort of like performance mindset, connection, safety mindset, a lot of times I'll ask people, if I gave you $20,000, where would you invest that in either your personal or professional development? And there's really no right or wrong answer to that. But I think, again, gives you insight to the type of thinking, curiosity in how they engage with others, especially if they're, I'll typically follow up from more senior leaders. If they give a functional answer about where they'd want to develop their leadership style and what they'd want to do there. And again, their emphasis on where they want to complement their gaps as a leader is also quite telling in terms of whether they'll be fit with our culture. The one caveat I'll throw out there is that depending on what stage of business that you're in, it's not necessarily that we have the right answer and, that's the approach. I think it's really important to assess that others work with that. I know a lot of organizations that emphasize radical candor and take a very different approach to how they want to drive performance. And we believe that as well in terms of being honest, but I think we can convey that in a way that creates safety and is consistent with what has worked for us. And there's no right answer, but I think you have to just be really careful about the pieces to the puzzle that you're adding so that they fit with your way of working. Because if you think about strategy, fundamental skill sets, and fit with culture, they can have 2 out of the 3, but they won't impact your organization the way that you hope they will if they don't fit within your culture. And that was a lesson that, I wish I'd learned a little sooner in some of these few startups, but hey, I'm persistent. Maybe the third one's the charm, Rohit, and we'll keep trying again until
Well,
it works.
look, I was telling somebody that I don't think I learned my last lesson yesterday. It's gonna like life is just that. Every day you're learning something new. I think the question is, are you open to receiving the lesson, and then what do you do with it? And so I think the bad news, that lessons are going to keep coming. So you better get ready to enjoy them. Look, Karoon, based on everything you said, I think if I was to, again, synthesize this, really what you're getting at is having clarity in your company's values and what you want. That's step one, right? Just identify, in your case, you've identified safety and empathy as two things that you really want to look for. Know what you're looking for. Then second bit is that then try to understand the candidate, right? Like really get to know them. And in that would be the bridge to what you're looking for. If that bridge doesn't exist, that's not your candidate. If that bridge exists, they're your candidate. In order to build that bridge, you can ask a variety of questions, as you've shared a few questions that you asked, that really are trying to better understand the candidate. The old school questions work, but they don't get you as far. What you're trying to do is get to the same essence, but by asking more insightful questions, and everyone listening will have their own set of questions. But the idea here is that giving the candidate an opportunity to reflect on their own path, their current state, where they're working, who they're working with, gives you insights, both in the words that are used and the words that are not used. But in order for you to have that map, you need to be looking for those words, right? And so to have that, otherwise you can have a lovely conversation, but not know what's the so what from it. Because, I had a really good conversation. We connected really well, but I'm not entirely sure. So having that mental clarity allows you to build the bridge is really your, counsel, and which I really like, because I think that serves a lot of people really well. And I think by being non-prescriptive, it allows people to get to that bridge on their own terms. Karoon, I know we've got 1 more minute left. So in spirit of efficiency, it would be great if you could leave our listeners with 2 things. One, something that you recommend people absolutely do when they think about building teams, getting people onto their teams. And one thing that you recommend they avoid or not do, or at least something that you have now started avoiding that you feel would serve others well as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would just say, it makes a big difference, is just write down what your plan is and how you think about hiring as an organization, and share it broadly and agree. I think if you can just do that, that brings so much clarity, because just, you have to sit down, put the thought in and write, and you can start that at a broad organizational context, and then you can get specific for every role. I think going through that exercise and process has been something I absolutely recommend and ask of all my teams to do. The other part, which I also strongly recommend people don't do, and I see it too often, is don't worry about. A lot of times I'll hear rationale around, listen, we're not going to send this candidate through 5 different people because it's going to take too much time, or it's going to be a bad candidate experience, etc. As you can see, a lot of my thinking around it is, how do you de-risk getting the thing that your organization needs, wants, and that you're looking for? And so the second part I would do is never just let the hiring managers and a couple of folks that are on that team from a functional perspective do that process alone. If you organizationally can support that process, even one person outside their team makes a huge difference, because they think through that culture element. Whereas if you're just in that team, you're trying to figure out, how do I deliver that next thing X? Does that person help deliver X? And it misses some of the softer things that we look for as a business.
Good. Amazing words of wisdom. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for actually putting this great content together and creating a conversation about it. And you forced me to rethink through what I've written down, and share some of the latest thinking on it. So thanks for refreshing it, and on behalf of your audience who you're cultivating this awesome conversation with.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate kind words, and I can't wait to stay in touch to see where the next part of your journey unfolds. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll see
Excellent.
each other at dates in a few weeks. All right, bud. Bye.
Take care.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of the People Quotient podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to give us a like and invite your friends and colleagues to join us in this community. Until next time, stay focused on your people. Signing off, Rohit Bassi.